Hi, welcome everybody. I'm here with Ally Meyers. She's a workplace well-being strategist, speaker, and leadership coach with certifications in executive and positive psychology coaching in the science of well-being. She helps managers and their teams thrive in today's always-on work culture. Through her Flourish at Work training programs and keynotes, she translates well-being science into practical tools that reduce mental load, ease mental strain, and strengthen focus, connection, and engagement at work. She specializes in addressing the real pressures managers face: nonstop urgency, emotional overload, rising burnout, and the expectation to support others without sustainable systems. Her writings have been featured in the Boston Herald, Baltimore Sun, Orlando Sentinel, and Orange County Register. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Manny. It's great to be here and to create awareness about this problem that is so prevalent.
Yeah, so I'm really curious. How did you get to be where you are, helping organizations with burnout, flourishing, urgency, and always on culture? How did you get here?
Appreciate you asking. It's been a long and windy road, but my background is in engineering, chemical engineering, and so I've always had a deep respect for science, and I've always been very science oriented. I have a son, my oldest of four, who has some special needs and who was diagnosed early on when he was 3 with autism. And went through, a very trying time in terms of our family with his behavioral issues. At one point, his specialized school for autism was documenting 80 behavioral incidents a day. And it was very stressful. And I didn't even recognize how much it was taking a toll on me and my physical health. At that time when he was in this specialized preschool, I also had an additional 3 children at home, 3 younger brothers, and got to a point where the stress, although I wasn't aware of it at the time, was beginning to take a toll and physically manifest in my body. And I started, having back problems. And, I had a revelation one day that the pain that I was feeling had nothing to do with, poor moves in the gym or anything like that. It was just the stress that I had been under for years that I was finally becoming more aware of. And at that time, I had a lot going on. I was working, I had several community commitments, and I had these other 3 little kids at home, in addition to this child with major behavioral issues. So I didn't have a whole lot of time to, for self care, as they say. So I started small and I started just doing these small practices, which ended up compounding and having really a dramatic effect on my ability to manage stress, on my ability to show up as the professional and the person and the parent that I wanted to be. So it was my great experience with some of these small science backed interventions, in addition to my respect for science, the growing mental health issue that was right in front of our eyes, worsening year after year, which was the motivation for me to go back and get some additional training and certifications in the science of well-being and positive psychology coaching, so that I could begin teaching others some of these stress management tools, some of these simple things that we can do that we have to be very intentional about if we want to survive in the modern working world. So that's it in a nutshell.
No, that's an amazing story, right? Hitting the bottom and resiliency and bouncing back.
hmm Yeah, and my story was, I wouldn't even say it was hitting the bottom, let's say, as compared to other people's hitting the bottom. But hitting the bottom in terms of, a wake up call that these two things are related, and finally experiencing that mind body connection firsthand. And I cannot continue to do all the things that I want to do in this world if I don't make some changes or be more intentional about where I'm giving my attention.
So everybody's bottom is different, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But
Exactly.
it's the point where at you have to have a paradigm shift,
Right. Exactly.
or things keep getting worse. And for some people, they're fortunate that paradigm shift happens when symptoms are milder, and sometimes
hmm
it happens when things are really kind of at a critical point.
Exactly, exactly. So I was fortunate, and I'm fortunate to have seen the writing on the wall and made those changes, which I am confident I will carry with me for the rest of my life.
What were the changes that you started to make?
I mean, so simple, Manny. First and foremost, I was managing a household with 4 kids. I was working. There was always an endless list of demands and things to do. The first thing I started doing was waking up an hour before my children so that I had that 1 hour of solitude. And that slowly evolved. I traded a tiny bit of sleep with starting my day with intentionality. And for me, that made such a difference because within that hour kind of evolved as the years went on. It started just having my coffee without kids yelling. And then it slowly worked its way into setting 2 to 3 very deliberate goals each day so that I can start my day with intention. It then morphed into a very short meditation practice. Those things really, built on themselves and ended up being the foundation of, the way I live today. I I don't always do those things, but again, it really showed me that they're making a difference in my ability to manage all that's coming at me.
Yeah, so the changes were intentional. They were geared towards kind of clawing your way out from
Mhm.
from where you were and making some changes in your
Mhm.
life.
Mhm.
Um, and then at some point, did you have to change careers to get into coaching, or
Yes. So when I got my coaching certification, I didn't have the intention of jumping into the coaching world and being a one on one coach. I really wanted it for the fundamentals of positive psychology. That's really why I chose this particular executive coaching program. And then went on to do Laurie Santos' Science of Wellbeing course at Yale, which is the most attended course in all of Yale's history. Millions and millions of people around the world took this course because one, I think we all want to feel better about life, right? But combining those two, and I knew my history was in engineering. I did a few other entrepreneurial things in between, worked for our family business, but creativity is something that I always need to use and that I wasn't using. So I went into using my creative juices, building these training programs for professionals. I knew I wanted to speak in professional groups and use what I was learning and integrate it along with my creativity into these programs. And so I just jumped right in with 2 feet several years ago, starting to do these training programs and quickly recognized, Manny, as I'm speaking to professionals in general, professional groups at conferences is where I began, that managers were really under the most stress. And so that's what got made me pivot, not pivot necessarily, but really add a focus to management well-being.
and why is that? Why are you finding that the managers are under such stress? I mean, you talk about the idea of urgency, uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
and everything's
Right. It's an urgency culture. So, that's the answer at a high level. But I think specifically with managers, they're feeling the squeeze. I always envision a s'mores, okay? They're melting and they have 2 grams coming and squeezing at them, from their executive leadership above who, are really constantly changing business priorities these days. There's the integration of AI, which is not only changing priorities, but changing sometimes organizational structures and messages that manager has to be delivering to his people. On the other hand, from below, they have generations with differing priorities that are sometimes challenging for them to manage, intergenerational differences. And then I think the big thing is technology and how we're trying to integrate work and life today. There are numerous channels of communication and things coming at you every minute. Multiply that by having responsibility for sometimes 8 people, and you are probably bombarded with messages and problems from the minute you wake up to the minute you go to bed. So managers really have it. I think they're really feeling stress at a very different level than the average individual contributor, which is already, not a great state of well-being right out of the gate there.
so part of the problem with urgency is that they're getting the message from one side of the Oreo cookie that
Mhm.
we need
Mhm.
this now.
Mhm. Mhm.
How do managers and leaders manage to figure out, with all this urgency and you can't do everything, like
Mhm.
what's important? What's the
Mhm.
important
Mhm.
task to,
Mhm.
to focus on?
Mhm. Well, Manny, you used a word before, which is probably the most used word in my current day repertoire here as I'm doing training, and that's intentionality. There has never been a time in history that we have to be more intentional, and this is especially true for managers. So a few things that I always recommend is being incredibly intentional with your goal setting for the day. Making sure before you open up your communication with the world and are bombarded with everybody else's needs, identify those 2 to 3 things that are really important to you to get done. They may not get done that day, but you're starting the day with intention. So that's one of the tips I give. Another is giving up that idea that we have to be available at every minute of the day. Some of the best leaders lead by example by carving out small parts of their day to really move the needle on those high impact activities that they need to focus on. Or else, if they're having all these distractions coming at them, they're never going to be able to do that higher level thinking or strategic work that's needed. That's needed in every kind of role. But I think it's especially important in a leadership world where so many people are needing you nonstop throughout the day. So those are two of the recommendations that I give.
Yeah, so carving out time and intentionality with
Hmm.
what's truly important,
Hmm. Hmm.
and some stuff has to slide to the bottom of the deck and not get dealt with because it's not the
Yeah.
top priority for the day.
Exactly. And I think a big part of that is being very transparent with your team and making sure that you have a discussion around communication expectations. If you feel that, you may have these team members in need and they're waiting for a response, a quick response, well, that's pressure on you as well. But setting up expectations in advance so you don't feel so pressured, if you need to take an hour of deep work to yourself, so setting those communication norms and expectations on your team does for everyone, not only the people who are on your team, but as well for giving you the freedom you need to do the work that you need to do.
Now, one of the things you mentioned is so fascinating. It's the role of having multiple generations in the
Mm.
workplace,
Mhm.
and the different generations have different expectations,
Mhm.
different so-called ethics,
Mhm.
and the
Mhm.
managers need to be communicating,
Mhm.
motivating, and dealing
Mhm.
with
Mhm.
a whole bunch of different people.
Yeah, it's so true. And if there was one thing that people pull me aside to complain about a little bit as a manager, it's what are we doing, what do we do with this younger generation? They don't know what to do. And this brought me back to making sure that within my programs I had modules. The Flourish framework, it's an acronym, and each one represents a different driver of workplace well-being. And the H of Flourish is honor generational differences. Because when I started building this part of the program, I looked at a lot of research from Dr. Jean Twenge. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but she is the expert in generational differences. And she is really, really informative about how different generations' experiences in their formative years play such a tremendous impact on what they bring to work, on their communication style, on their priorities. And what happened in a nutshell is we've seen the biggest shift in these norms because of the technology changes that happened between, let's say, the millennials and the Gen Zs. So you take somebody like boomers, who in their formative years it was all face to face, maybe a little bit of email as they joined the workforce as a baby boomer. You compare that to a Gen Z who went through the biggest shift in history in terms of social norms, where when they were going through their teenage years, we went through the transition that the majority of the communication with your friends was at one point face to face. And then all of a sudden, the primary way of communicating with your friends was digital in that generation. So they literally, and this is one of the most important things I think that managers and leaders need to understand, they're not being selfish or disconnecting or, disengaged is probably a better word. They literally don't have some of the skills that we had the chance to practice in those years. So you get a Gen Zer. I had a young girl pull me aside after a talk I did about 2 months ago. And it was about creating well being in an intergenerational workforce. And she said to me, and this kind of blew me away. She said, "Do you think I'll ever feel comfortable speaking up at work?" And it's so aligned with what I was saying in that this generation is so used to being able to text and edit and create the perfectly crafted note and send it off, where they're much, much less comfortable than we are, Manny, with that spontaneous communication. So they're not speaking up in meetings because they're terrified and they haven't practiced that. So there are a lot of things that a manager can do to create small, safe ways for them to practice some of those skills that they haven't yet built. So the moral of the story here is I think it is a manager's responsibility to really recognize the differences in experiences that different generations are bringing to the table and do what they can to even integrate and educate the team on that matter. So I know that was a
So
lot.
no, no, no. So it's good. The safe place
Mhm.
at work. Tell me more about what you think about that and kind of the dichotomy of what I think is safe um, may not be what a team needs.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's an interesting question. Part of this generational researchers' works is on safetyism and the fact that some of the younger generations were raised, the majority of the younger generations are raised in this era of safetyism where they were protected, not only physically protected in terms of safer playgrounds and things, but even protected from differing opinions in some respects. And then you take the algorithms and they're only seeing one side of something. So, safetyism can be interpreted in many ways. But when I was referring to a safe place, I mean just taking those baby steps. Having a manager create the term used in the workplace is, a psychologically safe environment. Creating an environment where you're inviting people to speak up if they disagree with something, if they're not understanding something, if they feel like they're falling behind. And I think that there are a lot of ways through intentionality, again, here's that intentional word, through one on ones and through team exercises that you can get people more comfortable, speaking up if they feel that they're not with you on something.
So psychological safety in the workplace, communication, and then trust is also kind of part of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and trust is harder to come by because we're in a world where flexibility is a wonderful thing, right? Working from home is an amazing thing, but it's so much more difficult to build trust in the workplace when you're not with people physically. One of the things I teach in my workshops is around this idea of hybrid remote work, asynchronistic versus synchronistic communication. It's amazing that we can work on different time clocks in different places with the flexibility of being able to be with our kids. But there truly is a dark side to that. And that is the level of connection that we get with others, especially with the remote workers. They are the loneliest. So you have to be intentional, right? About when you're with those people. Let's say you have a hybrid situation where you have people in the office 2 days a week, using that time as wisely as possible to facilitate connection versus coming to the office for those 2 days and sitting in two cubicles next to each other, working on email. The manager really needs to facilitate conversations, even if it's around business goals, but in ways that starts really creating trust and communication and not micromanaging. That's another part of the trust equation, making sure you're giving people clear expectations of what that deliverable is and giving people the freedom to do it in a way that works for them when if they have the flexibility where it works for them.
So let me pivot a little bit to
Okay.
what does it look like? So you're talking about all the practices that can be implemented to support and help the managers. What does it look like in a workplace where the managers don't have that? What are you noticing?
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest problems today, and I think that this has been elevated post COVID, is you have people who were great performers and they're entering they're being elevated to a management position, and this is a celebratory thing, but not necessarily with the skills that they need to be a manager. Just because you might be a great independent contributor doesn't necessarily mean that you are a great leader or a great manager. And I see a big gap with that type of managerial or leadership training. You have people who were good at their job. It doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to deal with difficult conversations or they're comfortable giving feedback. So that is what I'm seeing. The organizations who do that, I think the leaders understand that this is going to be a really challenging job. You can't be everything to everyone. You can't carry their emotions. You can't solve their problems for them. And I think when you're able to begin your career as a manager, that is, then you're not so burned out so quickly, feeling that you can't manage all these things. This is part of the job, learning how to kind of come in and out of these demanding situations.
And what does it look like when this isn't being well managed? Are we
I
looking
think
at the
you just get turnover of your managers. They want to go somewhere else where they get more support because they're burning out. I think that's what it looks like, or relying on a few managers for most of the work. So it's not a pretty picture, but investing in that is really beneficial. For actually, managers who are burned out are 2 times as likely to have team members who are burned out as well. So it's not only a productivity, but it's a retention thing as well, not just for the managers, but for the teams.
are you finding that leadership is taking this seriously,
Yeah.
that they see it as a, you know, problem that they need to address with their employees? Are they looking at the lost profitability? What are they looking at?
Well, I am seeing such a difference in openness to this conversation than I did 5 years ago. I think because of the state of well being across the world and the mental health issue. Just to share some interesting statistics, Gallup does a 2025 State of the Workplace Well Being, I think it's called, report that they issue every year. Last year, they had the highest stress levels of a region ever, which was 50% of the respondents felt that they felt significantly stressed in the last 24 hours. And that was North America and Canada at the highest ever. They go on to ask them how, I think it's like a life satisfaction number, how they feel that their life is going. And 48% of the respondents, it was like the third year in a row that this number went down, felt that they're struggling or suffering. So I think because there is much more of a spotlight on the mental health issue, in combination with our younger generations saying that this is a not negotiable for them. Many of them are turning away higher salary jobs for roles that give them, a better opportunity for work-life balance. I think that that causes the executives to take it a bit more seriously when they know it's impacting their recruitment and their retention. So unfortunately, I would like to say it's because they just want to do what's right, but I think it really is a business, it's a business decision that's becoming more important to them.
No, yeah. It would be nice if the motivation was, we
It
care
would be, wouldn't
about
it?
my people,
Yeah. Mhm.
got what we got.
Mhm.
Tell me, how do managers support their staff? And we're asking all this intentionality of them without adding to their workload and their level of burnout. Like, how are they
Mhm.
supposed to add this
Mhm.
as another thing on their
Right.
tasks to be done every
Right.
day?
That's a really great question. And, one of my main points is it doesn't have to be an add-on. It can be practicing some of these things as an example to your people to give them permission to practice some of these things. And I don't mean anything crazy. I mean just, for example, creating micro breaks like between or buffers between meetings. So maybe not having a 30-minute, 30-minute, 30-minute meeting, but maybe having a 25-minute meeting with a 5-minute buffer. This is something that a company that I was just working with implemented, and their people are really appreciating just those few minutes of reset. Not only does that buffer help you better absorb what you just discussed and give you kind of that mental reset, but it helps you better focus for what you're about to do. So something like that is just a small way that you can support your people and support yourself. Another thing is making it clear when you as a leader are taking break, like carving out time in your schedule through time blocking for your focused work, trying to encourage a few times per week getting in that flow state to do your deep work, because your employees too are so much more, all of the research shows that you are so much more satisfied in your role and in your life when you can get into that flow state a little bit. And we have too many things working against our focus to allow us to enter into that state of effortless productivity. So those are just some small things. So I think, again, in terms of like wrapping things up for the day, not expecting people to, respond after hours, and clarifying that up front so people don't feel that they have to carry their phone around everywhere they go. Another big thing in terms of supporting their people is making sure to systemize their touch points, having routine one-on-ones, routine team meetings to show your people that you are available and they are a priority. And if they have challenges or bottlenecks, that's, those are the times that you guys can work through some of those things. So I think it's all in how you're creating your daily and your weekly and your monthly systems that really can embed some of those things into your work culture.
So we've covered quite a lot. Is there anything that you think is important that we haven't gotten to?
Let me think here. I think we've hit pretty much all of it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on. My interest and passion for helping people
Mm,
with burnout entrepreneurs, executives,
mhm.
um, and what you're doing. Like you said, we're speaking the same language.
Yes, we're see you know what? I thought of one thing I would like to add, if you
Yes.
don't mind, if I'm not
No,
too
no, of
late
course.
here. One small practice that I think is incredibly beneficial to both an individual and a team, and it's really based on neuroplasticity in general, is recognizing wins. This is so important. I recommend every one-on-one start by recognizing some win, starting meetings on a positive note. Because when you're able to do that, it rewires the brain to really shift away from that negativity bias and brings to the surface all of the things that are working and that are being successful. So that when that one thing doesn't go as planned, or perhaps when you have to give constructive feedback, it's not so difficult to do because you have created a culture around celebrating people's wins. And it doesn't have to be anything dramatic, it doesn't have to be a true celebration. But along those same lines, one thing that I practice myself that I have found incredibly beneficial is in these micro breaks, and they truly are micro breaks. They might be the 3 to 5 minutes between a meeting. We are all so tempted to grab the phone and scroll and to see what people posted or just check your email because you have a few minutes. But just to take a few minutes of quiet and either a few minutes of solitude, or one thing that I do is I take a pen and paper out and I write down a few things that went well that day. So I'm not focused on the things that I still have to do, which can be incredibly draining if you're always focused on that gap between what you've done and what still has to be done, but really trying to focus your attention on what you have done and what has been successful, I think is a real game changer in how you feel throughout the day.
That's great, great. And just a recognition that that gap between what has to be done and what you've actually done, that's always going to be there, right? It's like the
It's
horizon. It's, no matter how fast you move, the horizon's out there. That's just how
exactly.
it is.
Exactly. And if you go into a position of management thinking that every day you're going to be able to check things off your list, as perhaps you've done in the past, forget it. With all those channels of communication and all those demands, it's your new normal. You're never going to be able to do that. So, by focusing on the movement that you've already done, the growth that you've already seen, or the new skills that you've already built, projects, the projects that even if they're only in partial completion, then you're just in much better shape, both more optimistic and more confident in your ability to manage that next challenge.
Look at how far you've come, not how far you have to go, right?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
no, but great. I really appreciate your time in this conversation.
Yes. And I appreciate you having me. This was great. And I hope to come back on when you're, wildly famous from this podcast. And
No, I appreciate it. I'm gonna hit stop.